Hi all, and welcome to Medicool, a podcast brought to you by Ruth and Bruce Rappaport Faculty of Medicine at the Technion. Today we're going to talk about many exciting topics, but above all, we'll talk about how to make change. I have the pleasure of being joined by Professor Shai Shen-Orr, a faculty member at the Rappaport Faculty of Medicine at the Technion, and the head of the Systems Immunology and Precision Medicine Laboratory. Shai is also a co-founder and the chief scientist of Cytoreason and the head of the Zemin Institute for AI Solutions for Healthcare. And maybe the most important for me, my mentor in life and science for the last 6 years.
Thank you, Erik, for having me.
Thank you very much, Shai. And with everything you're involved in across so many disciplines, I have to ask, do people ever just straight up ask you if you're secretly a robot?
What do you mean?
A nice answer, nice answer. So, when I was thinking about our meeting today, I'm going to go full on things I always want to know about Shai and never dare to ask. So brace
this is
yourself.
a risky situation.
Yeah. Brace yourself. So let's start from the early days in your research career studying E. coli. Why specifically E. coli? What brought you to this research?
So this will highlight how old I am, but I started studying E. coli back in 2000 or 99 even.
I was in the kindergarten, so yeah, nice.
And if you wanted to figure out how to use computers and I guess 2000 AI in biology, there are not too many places for which you could actually start thinking, where there was data available to actually try and use computers as a tools to figure out questions in biology. E. coli was one of those places where the genome was sequenced, of a bacteria, and you could start asking questions in biology, and particularly at the system level. So not just asking about one gene, or one particular biological process, but really how does the entire cell behave?
I see. Okay, so. After you finished your research with E. coli, you moved to the C. elegans model system, and then you transitioned to human. So before moving to humans, which lessons you learned from studying these two model organisms?
So when I moved to studying C. elegans, it was again driven by this idea: where is the data, and can I ask system level questions? C. elegans is an amazing animal, 1,000 cells, which was originally chosen as an animal model because you could imagine studying an entire system together of 1,000 cells. Sidney Brennan made the original decision. He was later awarded a Nobel Prize for this. And for me, making that shift from E. coli, which was the entire universe in one cell type, to cells that need to communicate and form something that's an organism was an amazing shift from a conceptual perspective and thinking about biology. And I think that kind of took me a lot forward. But the other thing it taught me is also the importance of breadth and I guess coming into a new field, because as you shift from one model organism to another and shift domains in life, you're coming in with one hand a lot of background, and it's useless initially because you're a total newbie. You know nothing about what's going on. It takes you a while to understand the language, to understand how people think. And then what comes interesting is as you start understanding how they think about questions, your background that was initially useless gives you a lot of power to understand what are their assumptions. Are those assumptions justified? Can you read between the lines and find out make new discoveries and basically break assumptions? And I've used that lesson in life forward. I often now move into new directions. There's a learning curve, but that all that prior background ultimately serves a lot to try and make revolutions in wherever it is that you move to.
I see. And in your opinion, what makes human models so unique that you, right after studying these two model organisms, you move to human? How in which day it might be similar to what you studied before?
Well, it's a big loaded question. I'll say, maybe I'll start by saying what drove me there. Were I think three things. So one was the availability of data, which when I started in 2000, it was still yes, we're sequencing that human genome. Is it going to be a real thing? Will we only have one genome, or maybe we could get a few? By the time I made the choice to shift to doing human studies, which was in 2007, it was clear that this is where humanity is going to be investing to generate most of its data. So if you, again, want to be using computer science to ask questions in biology, you need to do it where there's data, and in humans there was. So that was one strategic decision. The other side of which was, unlike our animal model systems, whether it's the E. coli or the animals like C. elegans, humans live in the real world. And that makes them much more interesting from understanding their relationship to the environment, to Earth. And I made that choice specifically around the immune system, which, to me is really the sensory system of, that senses the environment and, continuously and adapts to it. And the third choice was, though basic science is in my heart, if I could ask basic research questions in humans, and basically healthcare, and maybe the taxpayer would benefit more directly, I felt it was an obligation that I had to take on.
I see. And I mean, let's talk for a bit about formulating research questions, as you mentioned. I mean, do you see any commonalities in formulating research questions in humans, in animal model systems, or are these fields totally different from one another and no commonalities at all?
I think there's a huge commonality in research in general, and I hope you've learned that one. But I basically think that I actually this came from my own master's advisor, Uri Alon, back when I was still a kid. He said to me something very interesting. He said, in biology, every question is interesting, but few are important. And I think from you looking at this from a research perspective, that has been an important driver for me, because you can ask 1,000 questions and publish 1,000 papers, but actually you want to be doing the ones that are really important and are going to make a change. And so it means sometimes taking a back seat, not necessarily running the race, but actually being willing to drop some cool hype and identify really what is the questions that are going to be changing the needle ultimately. And I think that is true independent if you're doing this in different animal model systems, as I have, or you're shifting to other research directions. This is key.
And how, as young researcher, one should know if he's doing the important stuff or just the cool stuff? It's a tough question to answer yourself.
Right? Extremely tough. So I think maybe one thing to think of as a young researcher is that you're never alone, that you should never be alone. You can be, one way of doing it is by educating yourself through reading the literature and assuming that 90% of it is not important. Okay, so now the question becomes, rather than am I doing something important, well, let's rank things so that the top one is the most important, and so reading is certainly one. Talking to people. The more diverse their education, the more diverse their background, the more you'll learn whether it's important or not. Digging into the history of fields. So take a paper and then look back to say, okay, what does it reference? And what goes, just start walking back and you'll see how fields develop. And I think those are kind of ways in which you ultimately, make those choices to ask the right questions. We have this saying on the printer in the lab, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you can save
an hour in
the library
a year in the library by 1 hour in the lab.
The reverse. You can save an hour in the library by spending a year in the lab. Now you make a choice. Do you want to spend a year in the lab or go to the library for an hour? So I mean, basically, there's that saying, standing on the shoulders of giants. We're all one chain, and you need to. So you're never alone. I think is the thing to tell young researchers, and open up.
Yeah, I see, and I think this takes us naturally to the founding of Cytoreason. So after joining the Technion, you co-founded Cytoreason. So first, what made you back then found Cytoreason, and what did you feel that was missing in the academia that that made you clear that Cytoreason should be founded?
Oh, that takes me a few years back. So basically, when I came to the Technion, one of the reasons I chose to go to the Technion was because it had both, kind of a life science and engineering kind of disciplines that were strong, and because of the principles that it valued, making changes in the real world and engaging with industry and so forth. And the reason I thought that was key because while I tremendously enjoy research from my early days in E. coli, there was always that question I kind of referred to before: what is the taxpayer getting, right? And it's a real privilege to sit in academia. I mean, basically, universities, public universities like the Technion, we literally, the taxpayer is spending money for us to be having fun doing research, and I do, right? So what do we owe them back? Was a question. Certainly teaching, the next generation is a part of it. But I think the other thing that we owe them is that as we do that, process of making discoveries, that we do our maximum to ensure it goes forward. Now, there are many discoveries that will never, go to be applications, and many discoveries that are, that it would take 40 years to figure out the application. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you can see things that, that could make a difference in the real world beyond the paper, and you need to ask yourself, who's going to do the job of taking it from the paper that I published to the world? And the more you learn the ecosystem, you realize that sometimes the answer is the best person to do this is yourself. That you can't necessarily rely that somebody's going to read the paper and say, ha, now let's go and make an application that's going to change something in the real world. And so that was one driving choice, is that when I came to Technion, I said I wanted to spend some time, some percent of my lab doing things that are application oriented, while still the driving spirit is one of basic research. And so what happens is when you go into university and you start, with that philosophy, initially you start to do applications in the lab, and you realize that universities are good for some things and not so great for other things. So they're not necessarily great to bring in software engineers to work in your lab to build applications. Mm-hmm. These people earn too much to be paid by university, and they also change how your lab is, because they're very application oriented rather than basic research. And you also learn that companies, and the ones that ultimately make that impact for the patient, they want to work with companies more than they want to work with labs. They tend to be more reliable, they tend to be able to scale and so forth. And then, of course, scaling is a huge thing, right? So as we do research in the lab, and we do that basic research, spending a few years, writing a paper, as we both know. What if I now had to do this 1,000 times? So should I hire 1,000 students? Or right?
We don't have a big enough lab for that.
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
Exactly. This is a call out to enlarge the lab space. So there are alternatives. There's scaling, and scaling requires multidisciplinary work of people who have very different skill sets than most academics. They are just as smart, just decided to specialize in other things. And so, that was the driving reason to start a company. And then the timing is always a question. When's the best time to do it?
We'll talk about that later as well.
All right.
But before that, can you please elaborate a bit about these two different disciplines, the academia and the industry? Do you ever need to choose between them, or you gain more when you kind of trying to leave these two worlds together?
That's a loaded question. I'll say that if you give up on sleep, you don't need to choose between them. I have made that choice. But I think they've actually, so now I'm engaged in both worlds. And I think both worlds benefit from that. So
in which way?
Great question. So let me put it this way. First of all, for let's say the industry piece. The industry piece, if the company, as Side of Reason is a scientifically oriented company, the fact that I sit in academia and I'm thinking about the next generation of things that are totally not yet viable from a commercial perspective, but my head is in the clouds, as they said, is beneficial for the company. It's like an incubator in many ways for ideas that nobody would want to fund right now, right? Okay. Because they're not yet relevant for commercial success. So there's advantages in this, and also in a scientific field, it is still the case, and I think down the road it will be still that if you're talking about Cyreason's customers or pharma, they read papers. Those papers get published best in academia. So there's those types of kind of interactions. The reverse is interesting. The reverse is much less obvious, I think, before you get going. And for me, Cyreason, I think, changed things in the lab, and maybe you've experienced it, in two ways. One is a much better understanding of how to choose problems that would make an impact, right? What's more, we talked about interesting and important, what would be relevant versus not. It's not to say that you shouldn't be choosing very basic research level questions, but it means that you understand the path now between basic and application, and it allows you to make those choices in a smarter way. And the second thing is, I think one of the problems that academia has is that to become a principal investigator, to become a lab head, really you're selected on one thing, which is the quality of the research that you do and your ability to write published papers. That's awesome. It provides scientific excellence, but there's a lot of training that's missing, such as how to manage people, such as how to plan ahead, right? No one, if you're doing a PhD or a postdoc, no one said, we need to teach you how to manage people. We are only going to select good managers to become PIs. And so what happens often in academia is that you get wonderful scientists who are not necessarily good mentors, who are not necessarily good managers of their time, who are not necessarily managing to get the transition or think ahead and fund their lab appropriately. Cyreason taught me a lot about that, and I hope you as a student experience some of that benefit.
Definitely. But before moving on, I do want to talk a bit about choosing problems, choosing challenges in research in the industry. So there are two ways of choosing challenges. The one way is to identify the unmet need, and the other one is to come with a cool idea. What's the best I would not say what's the best option, but what's the better path to choose?
It's a wonderful question. Here's what the theory says.
Right.
The theory says find the unmet need.
Okay.
And then develop the technology, which is a wonderful point, which is certainly worth looking at around that. But the truth is, most companies that I'm aware of, especially in Israel, are not founded by finding the unmet need first, right? And the reason is because the people who develop technologies don't necessarily know how to find the unmet need, and they get up in the morning, what they want to do is develop a technology. So I think because that's the theory, and in practice, there's a lot of people who are developing technologies, the right thing to tell people is, do what you're passionate about, but then be very, very wary, very, very careful, and start planning ahead to identify that the fact that you have a cool technology is just not enough, right? And so, a lot of what we do, for instance, in the Zimin Institute, which is this institute I head at the Technion, is to take, Technion faculty or technologists and chaperone them to who have a technology, chaperone them to help them identify what the unmet need. And the truth is they need that help because they don't know how to find the unmet need, and they don't know how to map the competitive landscape, and often what's the competition, and so forth. I think ultimately it's about your passion and recognizing what you're missing. And most technologists miss knowing what the unmet need is. And so the truth is they need to, usually when that's the case, not move too quickly. Just take it slow, because until you know what the unmet need is, you will not make serious, you won't manage your company will not succeed, right? And so it's okay to start, but be very careful and identify those needs and get people in that will help you figure out what those needs are.
Do you think that in academia we follow the same trajectory? I mean, starting or the other way around, or usually in academia we come with the problem, we come with the question, with the theory, and then we try to prove it, or maybe just to prove it, okay, or to test it. Let's say. How does this relate to the unmet need that we spoke about?
So I think it relates in two ways. One is, which again are issues in academia. One is to figure out the unmet need. Very often the people who know what the unmet need is don't know how to develop the technology, and the people who know who the unmet need is, or the technologists, don't know how this relates to ultimately bringing value. So I can identify an unmet need that looks very, very serious, and nobody would want to pay for it, despite it's an unmet need, right? Because in the priorities of people, if you're thinking about healthcare, if your problem is number 600 in the reasons of why the healthcare is expensive, it ultimately you may not be able to build a sustainable company off of this, because there's 599 other reasons that people want to be targeting first, right? So I think academia needs, we need to bring those people together.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side, and again, I'm a very big believer in basic research in academia. People think because I do applications, I don't like basic research. But no, I actually am a very big believer in this. What it means to me is that, the way I would take it is, you really need to make an effort to find what the unmet need is, and then you need to make a choice. Do you want to be pursuing those problems and so forth, or do you just want to be doing basic research? And over time, somehow it will transform into something, or maybe a new discovery that you've never known. We need to be able to entertain both. But not knowing what the unmet need is ultimately kind of walking blindfolded.
Right. Now let's take the discussion to challenges. Okay, so we spoke a bit about how academia and industry contribute each other. Now let's talk a bit about challenges in each of these disciplines, and in which way the solutions are different in each discipline.
So are you saying, well, what are the challenges in academia and what are the challenges in industry?
And maybe they shared challenges, and how can we solve them?
Yeah. So I think they have slightly different challenges, and which is a good thing. I mean, I think the challenge in academia, certainly a challenge is it's new people coming in. They've never done research. And the research that you want to be doing in academia is one in which you kind of traverse the cloud, right? You don't want to go from A to B. You really want to start in A. Maybe you were thinking about B and explore and find someplace else. That is a challenge. It's actually an emotional challenge, first of all, because it means you're going to get lost in the woods, right? Mm-hmm. Most students, for the first time, often if they come to graduate school, that means they did very well in undergraduate. Undergraduate, what does it test you? Is that you know how to read the book, and then you know how to do it in an exam.
And memorize it.
Yeah. And memorize it, right. As a med school student, you know this well. And research is a very different thing. So emotionally, to take this path is a non-trivial path. It's kind of the Robert Frost song, the road less taken, the less traveled by, yeah, right? And that has made all the difference, right? So I think from a development perspective, being able to, start in A and then get lost is a big challenge for people, but ultimately is a worthwhile personal development, and is also how new discoveries are made in academia. On the industry side, I think one, there's the whole we talked about this, the business model, the value. What is the product market fit? I have a technology, I have an unmet need. Do I really know to do it in a way that ultimately will build a sustainable business? Is one problem, which is a different type of cloud that you're walking in. And then second, I think is leadership and execution, which is a very different thing that you have in academia. In academia, usually, I'd like to think most deadlines in academia are soft, right? We're self-poised. Tomorrow I will finish the paper. Maybe let's push it another day, right? Another way. In industry, that's not the case. There's a deadline. We need to, if there are people who are overseeing it and are looking to see what you're doing. Executing quickly is a really non-trivial thing. Again, something that most academics, no one ever taught them to do. Doing so in an efficient manner, and leading, often is a very big group forward, is a totally different challenge.
Yes, and so I kind of get the feeling that there is a trade-off between creativity, which there is a lot of place for in academia, maybe in industry as well, you'll tell me, and executing quickly. Okay, and how can you balance these two things when choosing, maybe, or pursuing one of them?
It's a wonderful question. There's actually a wonderful book on this topic called The Innovator's Dilemma, right? In which that Companies, when they need to, they start with a really creative idea, right? And then they need to push forward and execute on it. And as you do so, and you sometimes become the world's best in something, there's obviously always something new coming in. Can you innovate there? Can you maintain the leadership, or somebody else comes and and takes the leadership from you? So I think it's almost like a phase transition. You need to somehow maintain it. There's a lot of it's a huge problem in industry, I think, where how do you keep the creative hub? Do you do so by building a isolated incubator where you're trying to do these things, to leave some money aside for research? Do you tell people, now we execute, and then in a month we spend some time creatively? I think it's one of the bigger problems companies have, and there's no really great solution from it, because ultimately, as companies really succeed, if you just look at the industry, like very big companies are not creative. The way that they're creative is that they buy small companies who are creative. That's how they put in. So they struggle to maintain the creativity inside, and they buy it from the outside, right? So ultimately that phase transition, if you want to succeed, is going to take you to some place where you're going to need to rely on bringing it from the outside.
Yeah, it's a nice approach. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to relate to what I said before, at least to me as a person, I maintain this with, the lab for me is a creative place that I can go wild, and the company is something where it's a different type of creativity. It's still a startup, and there's a lot to be doing there. But the types of creativity they do is actually more on the how do I get 130 people to row together, right, and hit the right problems.
Okay, so speaking about going wild, so I want to talk a bit about the medicine trajectory, okay, along the years, in recent years. What excites you the most?
What excites me about the changes in medicine?
Yeah.
I think the AI revolution, if I can use a buzzword, is going to give us a lot of opportunities to give better healthcare and reduce costs in healthcare in some places, which may allow us to introduce novelty in new directions that otherwise would be unsustainable economically.
Okay, if so, what's your science fiction scenario in medicine in 20 years from now?
Oh.
We can start from 5 years from now, but then you'll need to answer in 20 years from now as well.
I'd rather start at the end. And 20 years is a very interesting point. So as you know, we've recently launched a Healthy Aging Institute at Technion, which I happen to lead. In 25 years, which you should have said 25, 1 in 4 people in the world is over the age of 65. Right now, the number is 1 in 9. Okay, so in 25 years, the world's population ages dramatically.
But
okay, no, let me see how that relates. Right now, most economic costs of healthcare are in the older, individuals, as you know. So basically, if there's no young people, because 1 in 4 is 65, you have an unsustainable healthcare system. Okay.
Right.
So here's 2 science fiction scenarios.
Okay.
One is you have an unsustainable healthcare system. Nobody gets good healthcare. Right?
Bad scenario.
You didn't say I had to think about a good science fiction story.
Okay.
Many of them are dark, right? And the other one is that we actually recognize this early enough and change a lot of different things, not only in the healthcare side, using AI and diagnostics and new data modalities and omics so that medicine is practiced differently. And almost I would say moving from disease care to healthcare, right? Which is a shift, but also that we manage to bring those people who are over the age of 65 back into, where we can get the dividend from them, their society. They don't retire. They're part of society and they're part of much more contribution. And I think that's a wonderful scenario to be thinking of.
Okay, so I promise that I'm not going to be easy on you, but I would claim that today's 65 is not 65 in 25 years from now, just like 25 years ago. So what's your opinion on that, and how that changes your science fiction scenario?
So I totally agree with you, though, if that means we're going to live to 120, the answer I think is no, at least not in 20 years from now. But I think, from society's perspective, it's a good thing. It means that people over the age of 65 can continue working. from how you think about retirement today, it's not necessarily a good thing. And one could even argue, I work quite a lot, as you know, but I really don't work. I have fun. So if you manage to build a society in which people who are continuing to work are doing so and having fun and are managing to contribute to the social security, to the society, so that healthcare is a place where it is economically efficient, and in particular that gap between health span and lifespan. 8 years of miserable life in the end of life is the average now. If you change that, that's an amazing healthcare system. The other thing to point about medicine, which I would love to see in 20 years, and I think it's doable, but it's a lot about moving things around in the hospital, and it's not trivial. So right now, the hospitals are arranged by departments, like basically by organs, right, in many ways. And then there's that internal medicine, which is a funny term that sounds like, it was invented in the 16th century. Everything inside, right? But if you look at diseases, they happen to work at the molecular level, not at the organ level. And so you would want to see medicine that's much more connecting the molecular pathways, right, across, would be one interesting thing. And then the other one, especially again going back to aging, is when problems become multi-organ. I think, by at least my own experience with my family and talking to others, has been that's where medicine fails, in that it's much more integrative, and you don't fit any one department. You're sick with this and this and that. And so I would want to see a medicine in 20 years that's more molecularly driven and that is much more integrative from a multidisciplinary perspective, so that patients are treated as a whole rather than, this organ aches, and so we'll put you here in this one.
I mean, okay, and are there any milestones that we kind of need to achieve in order to come to that point, that we are as humans treated as a system, as a whole system, and not, as you said, by organs?
Many milestones. I think some of them are easy to articulate. Others, I personally haven't been involved in thinking about, not being a physician. But for instance, one effort that I'm actually involved in to some extent is trying to shift aging to be a disease, right? And the reason you want this is so that payers, insurance companies, are willing to pay to prevent aging, right, or to slow down aging. Today, you can't run a clinical trial whose purpose is to, basically help allow healthy people to remain healthy longer. That's a huge example of a milestone that you need to shift. Again, also in the healthcare industry, less so in Israel because of how our system is set up. Ultimately, the people who shift the industry are the insurance companies. If you cannot get insurance companies to shift their mind that they're in the 21st century, to be more AI-driven, to be more precision medicine-driven, so that when a physician gives a drug, they are using AI models to say this patient should get this drug now, and not just based on the clinical guidelines or the cost guidelines, but rather personalization of these are the changes. So sometimes the way I think you move systems forward is taking the most conservative, old school stuff and making revolutions there. So yeah, revolutionize insurance companies.
Okay.
I think that's going to make a lot of the differences.
I see. And we mentioned quite a bit the term AI. I think that if I ask 100 people what an AI is, I would get 120 answers. How do you see AI?
I think it's a wonderful point, and I generally agree with you. The definition of AI used to be anything that we couldn't yet do, right? That we couldn't understand. Decision trees used to be AI. If you didn't know how to build a computer system that would make a decision tree, it's AI, right? Okay. If you are achieving, so in a space in which we're able to achieve so much now, much of which we don't understand yet, that definition needs to be reevaluated. I think there's the hype of this, and then there's the utility. And I'm going to use a very utilitarian definition, which is, to me, it's a computerized system that helps overcome some of the human fallacies, right? So humans are very bad at thinking broadly. If I can get a computer to help me out there, I'm willing to tolerate it as an AI, right? They're very biased. You can build machine learning models that are not as biased, right? So I think the one definition of computer science, which is it's always the next thing we can't achieve, is fine. The big change here, which is relevant for society, is that computer science has now become to the things that have been built have come to a point that you would need to be foolish to not consider them in your day-to-day.
Right, but I mean, you mentioned thinking wide. I mean, today if you pay $20 for the paid option of ChatGPT and use one of the advanced infrastructures there, it can generate ideas for you. Do you think it's going to replace humans in generating ideas?
No, I think like any technology, it's going to take humans and empower them. And when it does so, there are going to be some human professions that are going to be left aside, and the people in them are either going to need to retire, like they've gotten to an age where they retire, or they need to be re-educated to move to this next thing. This is how technology, from the washing machine to, when I got to the Faculty of Medicine, end of 2011 is when I came to the Technion as a faculty member. There was a woman in the faculty, nice lady, just about the age of retirement, whose full-time job, was to send faxes. And the problem was that by the time I came, she had no job because nobody was sending faxes, right? And she was at a point where you couldn't retrain what she was like. She wasn't at a point where she was wanting to retrain, and she was retiring, right? You take a med school student today and you say, what of the things that you're doing you could be more empowered to do? Like, we could free up by using ChatGPT or other AI agents. There's quite a lot of those things. And I think we need to be thinking very closely on how you change. And does it mean that there's not going to be that med school student, when it becomes a physician, has no job? I don't think so. I think their job become more interesting, and there's another tool.
Great.
You have a future, Erik.
I hope so. After spending 10 years in the Technion, I hope so. So just before we finish, your best advice for someone who wants to combine research, academia, maybe industry in his career, what it will be?
My best advice, I would rather prioritize my advice. It's way easier. But I think, 2 points. Keep an open mind, talk to a lot of people, and generate opportunities, internships, reading, going to conferences that are not related to what you're doing. All those things are just open opportunities. And then the second is, don't jump on the first train that you see. There's going to be, if you're the type of person that really are opening up, as I was saying, there's going to be countless opportunities. Not necessarily the first one is the best one, and not necessarily the timing that you're doing it is the best timing to do it. And so picking the right timing that you can then, let's imagine that train is a success, right? You've jumped on the right train. You need to be in the right professional, personal mindset that is going to allow you to take that train and ride it to the end of the line and to succeed without, compromise. And so I think that's maybe would be the advice.
Yeah, I think it's a great advice. I will take it as well. Okay, so with that, we are going to finish, and I want to thank you for joining us today. We talked today about the evolution of biomedical research, starting from E. coli research to systems immunology research in humans. We also try to understand what's taking an academic research to the industry and founding a transforming biomedical company. And we also talked about taking AI solution to healthcare to make a great difference. Thank you, Shai, for joining us today, and a big thanks to our listeners and the Ruth and Bruce Rappaport Faculty of Medicine at the Technion who makes this session possible.
Thank you, Erik.
Thank you, Shai.